Oh, you've joined me. Well, welcome back to my channel. If you're new to this channel, you won't find what I usually put out for my viewers. A video of happiness and jovial joking around and clowning and jest. No, today's video is a video of darkness and dismay. A video so abysmal, so heavy-laden with the burden of darkness that it can only be described as a tragedy. A few days ago, I thought to myself, how wonderful it would be indeed if I could get my hands on the magnificent 1/12 Collective Green Arrow action figure. And so I took to eBay. And as my fingers did tinkle across the keyboard, I saw Green Arrow after Green Arrow, with the prices only ascending up a ladder of insanity. But just as I was beginning to lose hope, what did my eyes see but a Canadian eBay seller selling the MezKO 1/12 Collective Green Arrow? Yes, indeed. Could this be real? Or are my eyes deceiving me? Well, your humble servant knows full well of a large and thriving Asian, Chinese knockoff goods market on eBay, and on Amazon for that matter. And so I knew that this MezKO Green Arrow 1/12 Collective, sold by a Canadian seller for the price of $99.99, must definitely be a frickin' knockoff. Are you kidding? This thing is absolutely gonna be a knockoff. These things go for like $200 to $250 to $300 on eBay. Listen, I'm kidding around. I'm arsing around. I know it was a knockoff figure when I bought it. But I bought it so I could review it on this channel, and then you could see it, and then you wouldn't buy it. Because we can't give these people our money. This is not a good knockoff figure. Let me tell you about it. But first, let me get back into my storytelling voice, okay? Hold on a second. Our story continues. About a week and a half later, I heard a rap on the door, and who should it be but the friendly parcel postman? And it was nothing out of the ordinary to see his face, because indeed I see him multiple times a week. He knows me by name, and I know him by name. He hands me the package, we talk about the weather and what our day is going to be like, until we say farewell. I shut the door, tuck the package under my arm, and go back to the table where I sit down to finish off my Lucky Charms and watching my YouTube fails. It wasn't till after, while sipping my coffee, that I decided it was high time that I had a peek inside the package to see exactly what I'd ordered, because, truthfully, I'd forgotten. After cutting the tape with a knife and peeling back the cardboard, what did I see on the inside but the familiar green MezKO 1/12 Collective Green Arrow box? Oh yes! I'd forgotten, and now I remembered. I'd ordered a knockoff! But was it a knockoff? I mean, I'd seen fake MezKO 1/12 figures before, and they came in packaging that looked like the real deal, but in hand, this really did seem like the high-quality packaging that MezKO uses. The Green Arrow logo clearly displayed on the front of the box, and the MezKO 1/12 Collective logo on the top flap, with all of the internet connectability information on the bottom. The Instagram, the Twitter, the Facebook, it was all there. On the back of the packaging, we had images of the actual MezKO 1/12 Collective Green Arrow figure. Getting excited now that I may actually have my hands on a high-quality MezKO 1/12 Collective knockoff figure, I pulled the flap off the box and then opened the front cover and looked inside the window. And I looked in the window at the figure, and I thought, no, this doesn't look quite right. So I pulled the figure out of the box, and I pulled the plastic off of the front, and everything looked like it was there. All 8 hands, all of the extra arrows, the bow, the figure stand, the little baggie, everything seemed like it was there. So I took the figure out and laid everything before me so I could take account of exactly what I'd gotten. And this is what I got. At first glance, the figure looked pretty good to start with. The colors seemed to be right. The scale, the size, the body, everything looked like the actual MezKO 1/12 Collective Green Arrow. Now, wanting to have a closer look at everything that I had surveilled in front of me, the figure and his accessories, I decided to take a closer look and start with the arrows. And they were all there, much like the MezKO. The kryptonite arrow, the exploding arrow, the grappling hook arrow, the razor-tipped arrow, all those arrows were there. Only they were much, much messier than the MezKO counterparts, the originals. The feathers on the arrows were clumpy and sloppy, and paint was slopped absolutely everywhere on these arrows where it shouldn't be. On the shaft, on the feathers, these arrows were a mess. The grappling hook arrow was almost completely devoid of the detail that it's supposed to have. The same thing with the exploding arrow. Both of these arrows looked terrible. Like somebody chewed some silver bubblegum and then formed it into the rough shape of what MezKO had in mind when they first created the arrow. Next I had a look at the bunch of 3 arrows, and even they looked sloppy. Next I looked at the knife, which at first glance looked very good, only as soon as you put it into the scabbard it became painfully evident that the knife was definitely too small to fit in that little tiny sheath behind his back. In fact, with the slightest movement it would fall out, and then likely get lost in the carpet, where it would get vacuumed up or licked up by a dog or cat. After the knife, I focused my attention on the scabbard and the fake arrows, which, the scabbard itself looked pretty good at first glance. You would never be able to tell that it's actually from a knockoff figure. However, when we got to the arrows, that was a completely different story, because one of the arrows, even with the slightest touch while setting it up just for the shot that you're looking at, it snapped off. I ended up leaving it out of the quiver when I stuffed the rest of the arrows in there, which, might I add, it was very tough to get them in there, a very tight fit, and I've seen the original MezKO, and it's actually very easy to get them in there. After that I looked at the bow, which again looked good. You would never know that it's a knockoff just by looking at it. However, it's the subtle differences that make it obvious that it is, as in the lack of scuffs and battle damage on the bow where there should be. As for those 8 extra hands that he came with, well, they were good enough, I suppose. There were hands made for holding on to Oliver's bow, and there were also hands made for holding on to the backs of Oliver's arrows. They did a good enough job, I suppose. You even had a little hand made just for holding on to the handle of Green Arrow's knife, although that one had a little tiny piece of plastic that was still stuck to the finger that hadn't been picked off after it came out of the mold. The stand itself was it's a figure stand with an arm. How do you mess that up? Next, I got into the proverbial meat and potatoes of the package, which was the figure. It was the reason why I bought it in the first place, so maybe the figure would have some redeeming qualities. Not so much. At first glance, the figure looks like it might actually serve, in a passing glance, for an actual MezKO 1/12 collective Green Arrow. So looking closely at the figure, starting at the head, things very quickly began to fall apart. For one, the figure's head was molded out of a skin tone plastic that was definitely not as high quality, nor the same color as the original MezKO. And the facial details in the sculpt and in the paint were definitely lacking. He had almost a complete void of any detail in his goatee at all, and very little in the mustache. The domino mask was painted shoddily, and he even had a big crack across the front of his face. The hair, much like the face, was also devoid of much of its detail and shading, and you could barely even tell that this is a shadow of the original mold that they likely swiped from the MezKO factory. Not only was Oliver's face devoid of much of its detail and the paint apps that it was supposed to have, and made of a lower quality plastic in the first place, but it also had paint slop right there on the chin, a nice helping of yellow mustard, and to top it off, a nice blackish blue scuff of some sort. Perfect. Did they even look at this thing before they put it in the package? Probably not. The next thing my eyes were drawn to was his arms. And the first thing I noticed is that the shoulder hinges actually had spaces in them, which was strange. And then I saw that the bicep swivels also had large gaps, and you could actually see right inside, and it was very ugly and very unsightly, and also not painted very neat. Green Arrow's elbows, though double jointed, were also really wiggly. Like, really wiggly. The whole figure really felt like it was unsecure and it could fall apart at any moment, and as you'll see later in the video, that's exactly what it did. After investigating the shoulders, arms, and hands, the next thing I looked at was the tunic. And at first, again, the tunic looked nice, although it was devoid of the wire that he's supposed to have in his hood, and it was incredibly sloppily sewn at the base. And again, we look at the harness that goes around Ollie's waist and chest, and at first, you see that A, it is devoid of detail, and B, the paint is actually slopped in all kinds of places that it probably shouldn't be. I guess Oliver's pants, or tights, looked well enough as it is, But then when you get down to the boots, again, things just don't look right. A lot of the different ticks and scuffs in the armor just weren't in the right place. And again, more sloppy paint on the backs of the boots, and even the bottoms of the feet just looked cheap. Not to mention the fact that those holes in the bottom of his boots actually didn't fit on the peg that came on the figure stand. Lovely. So after trying to install Oliver's quiver onto his back harness, it became painfully clear that those two little nubs that stick out on the back of his quiver played no part in attaching themselves to the straps on his back. What were they even there for? I mean, they didn't work. They didn't do anything. But as it stands, the quiver is completely useless unless you superglue it to Oliver's back. The next step was checking the articulation. What was this figure capable of? His head, being on a ball joint, did all the things you'd expect it to do on a ball joint. It wibbled around and went round and round 360. It could look down, and it could look up a little bit. The neck also had articulation where it joined to the body, and it could move around a little bit as well. Green Arrow's shoulders were on a hinge swivel, as we've seen before, and they had a pretty good range of motion. They could go around 360 degrees, they could go all the way up and reach for the sky, and they could go down somewhat. Oliver's brown harness got in the way, so they couldn't really go down that far. They kinda got stuck on the harness. Oliver's elbows, both being double jointed, had an okay range of movement. It really didn't seem like they needed to be double jointed because they didn't really move in any further than a regular single jointed elbow would. And it was in testing the second elbow that, well, look, it fell off. Just plumb fell off. And that's great. What is this? It doesn't even have a hinge peg. It has a little rivet. A rivet? What? Why's it got a rivet? I ain't never seen that kind of thing before. Well, after the accidental amputation of Green Arrow's arm from the elbow down, I decided that the rest of the articulation didn't really matter. The abs, the chest, the waist, the groin, the knees, the ankles, completely irrelevant. Because I might as well try to figure out what the movements of a piece of garbage in a trash bag are, because that's exactly what this is. Trash. Seriously, friends, if it's the MezKO 1/12 Collective Green Arrow figure that you actually want, then do yourself a favor and save your money. Stick it in the piggy bank, but please don't put that money towards this very cheap, trashy knockoff. If you were going to put $50 or $60 towards this copycat, take that money, save it, and save for a few months, and then when you have the money, actually purchase the real MezKO 1/12 Collective Green Arrow figure. Because trust me, your bank account and your collection will thank you for it, and purchasing the knockoff will only result in disappointment and lowered expectations. This figure is 100% not worth the plastic and the fabric that was used to make it. It is grade A trash and isn't even worth a bag of donkey farts. If I had to rate this figure out of 10, I would rate it a solid 0 and say do not purchase under any conditions, for any reason whatsoever. Understand, I bought this figure so that I could make this video so that you could see just how terrible it is, to educate you, those of you thinking that maybe you'll save a few bucks and purchase this one instead. Well, now you've seen just how terrible it is, just how crappy it is, and just how much you shouldn't buy it. Sometimes, when you really want something, it's better to save your money and get the thing you really want, rather than settling for less. Because when you settle for less with this figure, you are really settling for a whole lot less. Anyhow, that's all I have to say with this video today, so thank you so much for taking the time to watch it. I really appreciate you taking the time to do so. If you found this video informative and entertaining, then please take the time to leave a like on it so that I know I'm doing something right. And if you own this figure, please tell me in the comments below what your experience is with this figure. And also, maybe check and see what his elbow articulation is made of too. Does your knockoff have the rivets, or does yours have actual elbow pegs? I'm curious. And then finally, if you think you'd like to become a super friend and join the DC squad, well, hit the subscribe button. Remember to ding the bell so that you never miss a video, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching, super friends. Take care.